Today is Thursday, September 18th, 2014, and this is Stephen Fagan, the Associate Curator at the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. And the interview that we're doing today is part of the museum's ongoing oral history project. And at the beginning of these, sir, we always ask our guests to get us started with their full name, their date and place of birth, and just a little background about themselves.
Hey, my name is Les Parson. I'm 64 years old. I was born in December of 1949 in Inglewood, California, which is a suburb of Los Angeles. And I retired from a career in aviation, which included air traffic control and airlines just last year. I retired in 2013 after 44 years in total with in the aviation industry.
Let's go back to your childhood, and if you can, think back to your first memories of John F. Kennedy, this transition from Eisenhower to Kennedy in 1961. What do you remember?
In 1961, I was living in Lake Tahoe, California with my parents. Of course, I was 11 years old, and it was also the anniversary of the beginning of the Civil War, the centennial of the Civil War. So that was a big thing in my childhood with my cousin. And the election, of course, the 1960 election in the Kennedy coming into office in January. My parents are not pro-Kennedy people in California, and they did not support the president. But that was taken pretty lightly. It wasn't not nearly as serious as people take things today. It was they viewed the Kennedys as somewhat pompous, living in Hyannis, and the civil rights issue was on the table, or would shortly be on the table, and that involved a lot of debate. Now, I didn't have much interest in it at that time, and being an 11-year-old, but I do recall that quite vividly.
Now, were your parents typically Democratic?
My parents were typically Republican in California, and in those days, California was basically a Republican state. Much of it was Republican, so it was pretty normal at that time to be Republican.
Do you remember Kennedy's religion being discussed as an issue during that election?
Absolutely. As being the first Catholic, it was very much on the table. Again, the thing that strikes me the most from those days to this day is you did not have the electronic media that you have today. You did not have the 24 cable news. I mean, our news coverage was 30 minutes a day, and that was it. Yeah. And but yes, it was discussed primarily in the papers, and that in itself was not a huge issue in our family, but it was just the overall, I'll say, pompous attitude that my parents viewed it as.
Yeah. Now, I'm curious, as an 11-year-old, what you made of this shift from the oldest president in American history up to that time, someone who was very grandfatherly, Dwight Eisenhower, to someone who was much closer to your parents' age. Did that mean anything to see a change within these two men?
I don't think so specifically. I mean, I believe Teddy Roosevelt is in fact was the youngest president, and JFK was the second youngest.
Yeah, youngest elected.
Youngest elected.
Because Roosevelt took over for McKinley after
the assassination, right? So I don't recall that much of an issue. I do remember quite a bit, and I can't think of his name, the Alan Sherman, I think it was Alan Sherman, who did a few comedy spots on the Kennedys, on Jackie and Jack, quite a bit. Now, this was before a lot of things would come out in later years, but that was seen as quite humorous at the time.
Did you watch any of the Kennedy press conferences or keep up with just what was going on in the White House in general during those 3 years?
Well, not so much with the Bay of Pigs in '61, but really, what really had a lot of gravity was the October '62 Cuban Missile Crisis. That really frightened a number of us, and I remember going with my mother up to the supermarket with basically no cans of food left because we were convinced that this was the end and we likely wouldn't survive the weekend. It was really a severe time, and I remember that quite vividly.
It's hard for young people today to remember or to consider how close we came to nuclear war at that
Right.
time. Do you remember talking to your parents, asking questions, or if there was a family plan of action, what you would do in case of a nuclear war?
Well, no, I remember quite vividly that around this time, I think it was into '63, that I was in the 8th grade by that time. Now I'm 13 and almost 14, and I do remember a girl in school saying that the Red Chinese were going to attack us, and it was going to be the end. And this was on a Friday afternoon, and I was just devastated. I was convinced that this was going to happen, and we would not see Monday. And that was about the summer of '63. So we did talk about that a lot, and my parents said, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's always the end of the world, so it's going to be okay."
Did you do duck and cover drills?
We did a lot of duck and cover drills. The teacher would be in the middle of a sentence talking about chemistry or history or something like that. And as a matter of fact, I think in history at the time of the assassination, I was reading Jim Bishop's The Day Lincoln Was Killed, Shot, and it was what would happen is the teacher would be in the middle of a sentence and just stop and say, "Duck, cover," and you knew immediately what that meant. It was just because it was drilled into your brain that that's what you did. You got out of your chair and you went under cover, and you prepared for this as if the desk was going to save your life. But we didn't know back then. I mean, we didn't. Everything from the Soviet Union was evil and bad, and it was this great monolithic power to which we had no chance of survival.
Two times now you've mentioned the Civil War or Lincoln. I'm getting the sense that you were interested in that kind of history at this time in your life.
I've always been very interested in presidential history. It wasn't until more recently I took any interest in the Lincoln assassination as such. Conspiracy versus no conspiracy, that sort of thing. But the Kennedy assassination is one that's been a part of my life at times when I didn't want it to be. It is, I've heard one author describe it, and I agree with this, totally toxic as a source of interest, and it can commandeer your life, and I'm well aware of that. I mean,
I'm curious, as a teenager now, with the Civil War anniversary and reading Jim Bishop's book about Lincoln, how did you correlate that with the emergence of the civil rights movement and the desegregating of schools in the country?
Well, in Los Angeles at that time, quite simply, the white community did not support any kind of integration or busing as we had in those days, or threats of busing. And there were the black areas in Los Angeles, and there were the white areas, and so shall life be. And it just wasn't viewed favorably at all. And that was part of the angst with my family and the Kennedy family. It was leave matters alone, let people live the way that they're accustomed to, and don't interfere and force this. I mean, busing was something that meant the white kids going to the black areas was something that's never going to gain favor in any white community.
As far as race relations, I mean, this is the moment, the era where between the generations there is this gap, and the kids become more progressive than the parents in terms of their views towards civil rights. Did you see this happening as a teenager with your fellow high school students, that you were beginning to think of civil rights in a different way than your parents?
We really didn't give it a lot of thought because, quite frankly, we really weren't. We didn't see much of it. We saw very little of it. We saw some on television. In later years, we did see the Watts riots, which that I was involved in that, and so that was a lot more up close and personal than it was in '62, '63. You really heard talk, and you really heard the fears of my family and my uncles and everything else, and and Kennedy's the one doing all this. He's the one responsible for it, and it's all, things were fine the way they are, and let things lie. That was the tone.
Tell me about November 22nd. What do you remember?
November 22nd, Friday afternoon. Went to school as usual. I walked about 2 blocks, which is now at LA Airport, the Hertz rental car, expansive rental car lot, junior high school. We had, most people, even adults, had little to no knowledge that Kennedy was even in Dallas. And quite frankly, and I've said this to a lot of adults, really, there wasn't a lot of interest. You know, we all know the reasoning and the political motivations of why the Kennedy entourage made the journey, and the political fence spending and so forth now, but back then there was very little interest. And in my particular case, we just finished gym class, and came out of the shower and walked into the next class, and the guy came back the other way and said, the president's been shot. And the first reaction is total disbelief. And in the early reports, and I haven't heard this reported in many years, the very early reports that I remember was the mysterious lady and the man and the lady in the polka dot dress, and the machine gun on the overpass, and those were the first reports. And of course, obviously, that was not even close to the truth. But those were the first things that came out, and then it was considerable time, an hour, maybe 2 hours, when the fatal news came that the president was dead. And then all the girls and everything crying hysterically, and they simply said, "Go home. School's finished. Go home."
Any reaction from the students that would be considered favorable towards the assassination?
No, I don't remember. I don't recall any of that. No. There was, from the boys, there was a fair amount of ambivalence about it. There was a certain amount of that's just immaturity. I mean, in those ages, but
did you recognize that this was something historic? This was something akin to what you had read about in the Jim Bishop book?
I did. I think it took a few hours to sink in, and one of the most memorable moments of my life was early Saturday morning. I mean, at Friday there was just all of this doubt. There was just, I heard this and I heard that, and it was just, of course, without any electronic media, it was just television and radio, but nothing more. And the next day, my mother brought me a copy of the Los Angeles Times, and she said, "I want you to always keep this with you. It's a very important piece of history." I said, "Okay," and I did, and I kept it, and I have it to this day. That original newspaper, and it grew on us.
From the TV coverage that weekend, what moments stand out most?
In my mind, the police interrogation on the third floor, and I've subsequently read, I don't know how many countless documents and volumes and critiques from the Warren Commission report on how badly that was managed, but that's a whole other story. But that's what I recall the most was the coverage and the, excuse the term, shock and awe of the moment. It was just in the true sense of the word, awesome. It was beyond the scope of that one can grasp.
You had never seen anything like this played out on television?
No, I've never have. No. And then, of course, the Ruby shooting, or the Oswald shooting.
Sunday morning, where were you when that happened?
Sunday morning, I was in my pajamas and was hoping to watch cartoons, but that wasn't going to happen. And my stepfather was getting ready for an appointment. He was putting his suit on, putting a tie on to go somewhere. I don't know where. And
what did he do for a living?
He was a contractor, a sewer contractor in Southern California. And he was in the bedroom getting dressed, and I was watching TV, and I saw it live the first time, and it was just what you've heard so many times. Oswald's been shot. Oswald's been shot. And he comes in and he says, "Oh, well, that's it. They did that to shut him up." I mean, right off the bat, and so. I think the Oswald shooting tipped the scales for a lot of people, even immediately. I'm talking way back then. They just couldn't fathom the idea that it was anything other than organized silencing.
Do you remember any comments about Dallas being made by your parents or their friends or your classmates?
Now, at that same weekend, I guess it was the following weekend, I went to visit my real father and his wife in Lakewood, California. That's about, if you don't know the geography there, that's about 20 miles to the southeast, outskirts of LA, Los Angeles. And then we had a lengthy discussion of the whole event and what a black eye Dallas has, and what an eyesore, the city of hate. Never gonna get over this. It's always going to be a hate-filled city, et cetera, et cetera. And that lasted for several years, of course.
Had you had any prior notion of Dallas before this, or did that really shape your perception?
Well, I had none whatsoever. I mean, I really didn't have any connection with Texas at all.
Now, you're clearly very interested in the assassination as a subject of research. Did that start immediately, or did that come later, that interest in studying the event?
It grew in time, and in 1970, I was stationed in Europe. I was in Spain in the Air Force, and that's where I really started to gain an interest in reading all kinds of books, all the well-known conspiracy books, and later the Warren Commission report and the other books.
Why did that start in Spain in the Air Force? What prompted that?
I don't know. I mean, it just did. I went in the Air Force in 1969 in San Antonio, Texas, and from there I went to Mississippi, and I was in Hurricane Camille in 1969, and later in Spain. I don't know why exactly, but that's where I really started to get very much involved in the whole case. And one thing led to another.
What books do you remember reading at that time?
The first book I ever read was Jim Garrison's Heritage of Stone. And one thing leads to another. They're stepping stones, as you well know. And so it's then of course Lane's Rush to Judgment and Josiah Thompson's 6 Seconds in Dallas, and on and on and on. And then I really had the interest. I really gained the interest of it. But I really wanted to know the truth, and so I started researching other documents. Thought, well, it'd be nice to read the Warren Commission report, so I did. And then the follow-on books to that, the Case Closed, Gerald Posner, and I went many years seesawing back and forth about what I really believed.
And where are you today in 2014? In
2014, as I was in 1993, I'm a firm believer that Lee Oswald killed the president, and he killed the president alone. And Jack Ruby killed Oswald, and he killed Oswald alone. I'm 99.9%, and the only 10% that I reserve is to be consistent with the Warren Commission report itself. Is you're simply unable to prove with certainty a negative. You cannot prove that someone or some element didn't influence Oswald somehow. But I only give it 0.1% because the timing of events just doesn't support it, in my opinion. So I'm a firm believer in the Warren Commission conclusions.
You said that you've seesawed back and forth over the years. What do you feel is the most compelling, I won't say evidence, but compelling conjecture about a conspiracy? What has swayed you over time to that perspective?
To the perspective of?
You said that from time to time you would believe in a conspiracy. I'm just curious, what was it in the case that prompted you to believe that? The beginning with the trip to Mexico City in September opened some doors. The visit to the Cuban embassy, the consulate, and then the Soviet. We later learned that the purpose really is to obtain a visa, but it opens doors to conjecture, conspiracy.
But I really came to the conclusion that extraordinary claims requires extraordinary evidence. And if you don't have the evidence to support your claims, then it becomes strictly theoretical.
You had the chance to talk to John Connolly.
I did.
Tell me that story.
Okay. In 1988, November 1988, this is the 25th anniversary of the assassination. And it's significant in that I was stunned by the coverage that the media intended to give the 25th anniversary. I did not see this coming. Now, we didn't have the internet yet, quite yet. We didn't have email, we didn't have iPhones, we didn't have all these things. But we did have VHS. And so NBC ran a special You Were There or As It Happened or something like that. CBS did one too. But I believe in '88, and I could be mistaken on this, I thought only NBC did it. And it was not near the coverage that we saw in 2013. Not anywhere close, but still, to the serious student, it's still very, very significant. So I recorded all that on VHS, and I still have it to this day. And at the time, I was working for Continental Airlines in Houston, in the capacity of dispatch, flight planning, air traffic control, along those lines. And I was going to a meeting from Houston to San Francisco. So just before departure from Houston in first class, I look across the aisle, and lo and behold, Governor Connolly is there. And it's apparent that he knows the flight attendant. They're conversing back and forth, and she comes over to serve me coffee. I'm across the aisle, and I said, "Would you be so kind as to introduce me to the governor?" Now, there are a lot of people on the airplane didn't know who he was, I'm sure. And he looks over and he says, would you want to come over and join me? I said, I would be honored, Governor. So I come over, we hit it off, and he says, well, what can you tell me about yourself? I tell him who I am. I'm on a business trip. I dealt mostly with the government at that time, but FAA, things like that. And I never did ask him why he was going to San Francisco, but in any case, fortuitous event. And he said to me, he says, so what's your interest? I said, well, I attempted to approach it very diplomatically. I'm in the company of a governor here. I got to handle this correctly. So I said, well, I have an interest in the Kennedy era administration, is the way I approached the topic. And he apparently saw right through that and said, what do you think of the Kennedy assassination? So I was pretty stunned with that. I said, well, sir, I'm of the minority, even in 1988, that believes that Oswald did it alone and there was no conspiracy. And with that, he opened up quite a bit and proceeded to tell me about the sequence of shots. He says, well, you know, I have a vivid recollection of it, and very much what he said publicly many times before his passing, in that the first shot struck the president, the second shot struck him, and he said what it felt like was just if you took your fist, double up your fist, and hit somebody square in the back and the shoulder blades, and if you just visualize what that would feel like, that's what it felt like. And he looked down, and he saw himself covered with blood, and he thought that was a mortal wound. He thought it was fatal. And then Nellie Connolly pulled him down, and he did stay conscious and lucid throughout the whole episode until he got to Parkland Hospital, and he passed out. And he said he knew immediately that it was a rifle shot. He looked to the right, didn't see anybody, and then he was trying to see the president. And he was looking to the left, and that's when he was hit. And I asked him about, well, the initial FBI report pretty much said that. Without a lot of background and evidence, the FBI report, many people think just simply was mistaken with that. And they hadn't realized what the first shot did and exited the throat with Kennedy and so forth. And so I said to him, well, you know, what about the notion that the first shot missed altogether and the second shot hit both of you? He goes, well, I know that's what they say and that's what the experts say, but I'm telling you that first shot, he was pretty adamant about that. However, he's also adamant about the idea that there was no one else involved, and that launched us into another discussion. This is a 4.5-hour flight, and we're also having cocktails, and it was very relaxed. And
were you attracting attention from any other passengers?
no, in those days, first class wasn't full like it is now, and so there actually was only a handful of people on this airplane. It's a narrow-body airplane, and there was probably 6 or 7 of us in first class, and there was several vacant seats. So we weren't. There's nobody around close.
And you talked the entire flight?
Yeah, and well, we talked about other things too. We talked about we got into a lengthy discussion about how poorly people dressed on airplanes and things irrelevant to the case. But
did it seem that he was guarded until you mentioned that you believed Oswald acted alone?
it did seem that way, And when I did, I said, "Well, I'm of the minority, confident that he would be that he would concur with that." But I didn't really know. I wasn't really sure. And what he did say, what I've never heard publicly, was that, publicly, I've never seen on subsequent videos or TV. I don't know whether he said this publicly or not. What he told me was very interesting in the fact, 2 things, 2 other points, that at the time of the formation of the Warren Commission in late November, I think that was the 27th or 29th, somewhere in there, around that time he went, or he was very friendly, very close to Lyndon Johnson, and had been for many years. And I knew that. And they were of the same camp. And President Johnson had told him that once they went public with the commission, and that was off and running, and the idea was to avoid multiple investigations and conflicts between the state and Congress, and everybody wanted to do their own investigation. They said, no, we're going to have this one blue ribbon committee, the President's Commission on the Assassination, which became the Warren Commission. Well, right around that time, once that went public, that the President contacted CIA, Director McCone, and FBI Director Hoover, and said to both of them, I want to know what you guys have, if anything, on this case, on Oswald. At the time too, it was a lot of paranoia about communist conspiracy. Johnson really believed that quite a bit, according to the governor. He was very paranoid about subsequent attack, the whole thing, immediately following the assassination. And he wanted to know if, of course with Oswald being in Russia, that only elevated the stakes. And he wanted to know if they had anything they weren't bringing forward. And so we'll get back to you. 3 or 4 or 5 days go by. They come back. They call him back and they said, sir, we just don't have anything more. It is what it is. Just don't have. We have files. We don't have anything that changes the balance of things. That changes the case. It is what it is. So, and then we went on to discuss that, and these are his words, in 25 years, as it was at that time, in 25 years, nobody comes forward with another rifle, nobody comes forward with a bullet, nobody comes forward with any tangible, credible evidence, no deathbed dying confessions, and he personally knew most, if not all, of the commissioners, the esteemed folks on the commission itself, and the idea that they would engage in some sort of cover-up is just preposterous. He just didn't believe it. And he said, it would have involved thousands and thousands and thousands of people, none of which come forward after all this time. And now, of course, it's double the time. So it's just simply amazing. And so by that time, and a few drinks, we were getting pretty close to San Francisco. So it was an enlightening time. It was something I've always remembered. And this is my first opportunity to talk to anybody about it. I mean,
Did Did you part in the hope of maybe contacting him again in the future, or was that not discussed?
No, we didn't really discuss that, and the irony of it, or the coincidence of it all, is that a few days later, when it was time to come back, I found we were on the same flight. Only I didn't get first class on that flight. He did. So we didn't really discuss it anymore. Well, as I said, we did discuss other routine things about flying in general, and as I said, how poorly people dressed.
Did he remember you on that return flight?
Oh yeah, we saw each other in the boarding area.
I see.
And so.
Now, you said you weren't sure what he was doing in San Francisco. Have you subsequently found out, was he doing an interview related to the anniversary or anything like that?
I don't know, and I never asked him. I tend to. I'm thinking it might have been a family matter. He might have had a family member. I think he said he had a daughter. I didn't really get into it at the time.
Was this November of '88?
Yeah.
Okay, so right around.
It was right around the 25th anniversary. And,
what an extraordinary opportunity.
And the only regret I have is that we weren't able to discuss the movie JFK because it had not been produced yet. This was 3 years before the release of the film, and we really didn't. I didn't have any knowledge that it was going to be in production. I don't think he did either. But I've seen some of his interviews on TV about it, and they're not very favorable. So I just wish we would have had that time.
We pause real quick. Besides Governor Connolly, have you had the chance to meet or talk to any other individual connected to the story?
No, have I? Let me think. Not living here is.
Have you attended any of the various conferences or conventions related to that, where researchers gather to discuss the assassination?
No, I joined something. I didn't even tell you about this. But about a month ago, the Assassination Research Bureau or something, because they had a bunch of documents online, like the 26 volumes. See, there's the 26 supporting volumes, which I always wanted to get my hands on, but I never even knew of anybody that ever had them. Yeah. It was so expensive at the time. And now I guess all that's online. Mm-hmm. And
so do you participate in like online discussions, or?
Yeah, I do, and I participate with Howard Willens' page and on Facebook and all that from time to time. But, quite frankly, I just don't. You're off now, right?
Oh, no, it's
Oh, you are?
Still here.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Okay, sure, it's fine.
I think it's important to, when I talk to researchers, I try to get a sense about how they stay active in today's world, because in the 70s, researchers stayed in communication by writing each other letters, and today, of course, it's all forums and chat rooms and emails and things like that. So I think the progression of technology has dramatically impacted the assassination research community. So I was just curious on your thoughts.
So much of it is quite frankly negative, and so much of it is so conspiratorial, with just ridiculous claims. I'm not even talking claims that may have some legitimacy. I'm talking about fantastic, ridiculous claims. There's so much of that. It's like, why am I participating in this nonsense? It's.
Do you think that the internet has allowed individuals without expertise in the subject matter to put forth ideas?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I argue at times with family members, not too often, but at times, and they'd seen this, they'd seen that, and I said, "Where's your evidence? Bring the evidence to the table." There's every time, of course, there is no evidence. And
what does a place like Dealey Plaza mean to you, to be here at the site?
Dealey Plaza, to me, it's a sacred location. It means a lot to our history. America is such a rich nation in culture and history. And we went to Italy earlier this year, and Italy's beautiful and everything, but it cannot compare in my mind to the culture and the history in our short life that we have right here. And this is a memorable point, and quite frankly, some of it that I've seen out there in the plaza, and I think you'll know where I'm coming from, is quite disrespectful. And I have issue with that. And this is a sacred location historically, and it's not Disneyland. It's not Fun Time. I don't view it like that, but I think so many people do, and they disrespect the area, and I have quite a problem with that. And I'm talking about the peddlers that are out there. They're out there all the time.
Sure.
And
They have been since the 60s.
yeah, and I've seen a lot of them on TV. So have you. And